This is an Alexandrian Media original podcast.
Welcome back to Movie Night, a mini-series within the Composer Chronicles where I invite film composers, professionals, and enthusiasts to pick a movie or a series of movies off the shelf and talk about its music. Returning to the podcast for Reel 3 of Movie Night is film composer Ben Morales-Frost, and today we discuss the importance of melody in film score writing and how he uses melody to enhance his own film scores. Today, Ben discusses his music for the films A Beast in All But Name and Post-Carbon Society, as well as a process he is currently going through while writing the scores to the films Let's Talk About George and Blue. If you'd like to learn more about Ben and his career, I invite you to go back and listen to his feature on episode 20. This is the Composer Chronicles, the podcast that recounts the stories of composers past and present through the music they write. I'm Stephen Trigar, and this is episode number 46, Movie Night Reel 3, Melody in the Film Scores of Ben Morales-Frost. Thank you for coming back on to the Composer Chronicles. How have you been since I last talked to you?
Well, it's my pleasure to be back. And what a crazy, I think it's been 6 months since we last spoke.
Mm-hmm.
Bit of a crazy time.
Yeah. It's been a long. It feels like it's been much longer. Actually, I think when did we record? I think it was in September or like mid-September for that late October release of that episode.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah. So it's been a while.
Yeah. Well, I'm sitting here in London. We're in a perpetually grey sky experience here. It's slowly waking up. Spring is kind of happening here, and we've got some daffodils up and the odd sort of sunny day. And it feels a little bit like there's light at the end of the tunnel. Anyway, it'll be nice to get back to some sense of normality.
Yeah. Yes, it will. And speaking of which, last time we talked, you had some projects in the works that you had anticipated on finishing by this point. One was a film called Blue. And the other one, the name of it is escaping. I'm sorry.
I was working on Let's Talk About George, which
right.
We did actually finish in lockdown, which was extraordinary. That was a project where we started before the pandemic. It was planned, and then it just sort of stopped for a while. As at the beginning, when we all went into lockdown, nobody had any idea of how working was going to happen. And then people just started finding ways of doing things, recording remotely. And that's what happened. All of a sudden, I got a call in the middle of the summer saying, we've managed to edit this film. And we still like to do the score, and we'd still like to get it done by this date. So that's what we did. That was my first sort of proper project done remotely like that, and it went really well. We were passing edits back and forth, and so I was scoring things exactly as you kind of do anyway. I mean, a lot of this work happens digitally. The only thing that we didn't do in person was the spotting session at the beginning. But that went well digitally, and it was a nice experiment. And then the final part of that jigsaw was recording. I had a string player, this amazing violinist who also, I love this, she has a set of strings for her violin that you can tune an octave below, which gives you most of the range of a cello almost, which is crazy. You can't quite get the bottom C, but you can get a long way down, but in a very sort of thin, almost ethereal way. So you can generate those notes, but without that full-bodied cello feel. So anyway, I recorded the score with her for that. With me listening in, hearing live what she was playing on the other side of London, and that was great. And then, so that film, I don't know when that's going to be released. The aim is we're also going to be releasing an album as well of the music, but I haven't the faintest idea when that's going to be. The situation with festivals as well, that so many of them sort of are either skipping a year, some went digital, but the knock-on effect of that is that a lot of producers didn't necessarily want to go to or be involved in a digital festival, because you lose that, the magic and the impact that a screening makes when people are there. It's been difficult. So I think a lot of producers have held films back, hoping for next year, maybe. We'll see.
But you had you had already recorded, not recorded, you had already composed all this, and you were just waiting for the film to be released at that point.
That's right. So the other project I've been doing is Blue, which is this glorious story of a mother and daughter, and it's ethereal, it's quite spiritual as well, and very, very moving, and it's a lovely, lovely tale. And I think we first spoke about that, the director and I, in the summer last year. And all the filming has pretty much been done. The film's in edit now, but the whole thing's a incredibly slow process. And so the score, I mean, some of the score's been written. It features songs, which I've written, and so a lot of the film was shot to those songs, because, for atmosphere and and then I've also written sort of various bits of score. I've written that to the script, so before even seeing an edit, and now it's being edited to those sequences, which is for me a completely different way of working and really exciting. And then eventually, we're hoping in June we'll get the first full edit, and like I say, it's a really slow process, this one. And then I'll be able to sort of finesse and write the rest of the score around that. But that's great.
Wonderful.
I'm thrilled with this one. It's it's really interesting.
Yeah, I remember the last time that we talked, you had just finished those songs to have them. So you have the full score now, or are you still working on the full score?
I'm saying this because we haven't really even spotted it, so I don't yet know how much of a score there is to write. But we're very much, it's quite an organic process, this this film, and we're working at 1/10 of the speed of a normal project, simply because it is such a collaborative thing. Our director has used, she lives in a gorgeous place in southwest England, a little village called Frome. And Frome is an amazing, it's completely full of artists, whether they are film artists, musicians, all sorts of writers. It's just a very, very creative place. And so pretty much everyone involved in the film, she's recruited from her village, including some very high-profile actors as well who live nearby, and said, "Yeah,
Hmm.
sure. I mean, we're not doing anything else. I'd love to be involved in the film." So the whole thing's like that. It's been put together through, yeah, through friends, that sort of thing. Hence the slow process.
Yeah, that's interesting. And what is, sorry if I gotta, what is that process like? Does that question make sense? Is it, am I, am I
I mean, the
kind of being
process
too ambiguous here?
for this film specifically.
Yeah, what has it been like with this, the process with this, especially with how uh how different this world has become prior to, I mean, what film composing and making used to be like, as opposed to what it is now and what you've experienced with these films.
I think what's been strangest about this is not being able to go for a coffee with the director.
Yeah.
And I experienced this on a recent theatre project as well. What the pandemic's taken away from us is that informal feedback process.
Hmm.
And just being able, if we were doing this in normal times and the director would be living in London, we would be able to see each other. We'd be able to pop round, we'd have a drink after work, or we'd have a morning coffee and
Right.
chat. And so much of the process is like that. It's not writing emails and asking specific questions. There's so much more in the sort of, I mean, the emails are so black and white. There's much more in the kind of gray area of talking to somebody and
Right.
sharing that kind of social work experience. I
Hmm.
think is a huge part of any creative process, and
Yeah.
it's really hard. It's hard with that being taken away because you can't see into each other's heads. So the
Hmm.
only way you can ever get anywhere near that is to share what's in your head,
Right.
and that's very difficult to do digitally.
Yeah.
I don't know if you found the same sort of thing with your work, but yeah, there's something that a screen kind of takes away in an interaction.
Yeah, it does. Excuse me, I don't think I haven't really had the chance to do this kind of work outside of the screen so far. I have gotten a little bit of a taste of it. My fiance and I are currently starting another podcast on our own, and the dynamic one has when you are across the table recording with them in the same room and you're feeding off of each other's energy is vastly different than having a video call where you're both where you're both chatting with each other there. And although platforms like Squadcast that I use gives you that chance to have the video call and be able to see them, there's just something that's missing when when you're just not in the same room as them. You're not feeding off of that energy that you are giving each other. And so yeah, in a way there's that missing unspoken bond when you are physically with a person. um that so I completely understand your situation.
Yeah, I think you have to work harder
Yeah.
to make sure you're both talking about the same thing.
Right.
That's, I think, has been one of the hurdles. It certainly was in my theatre project.
Yeah.
It's tricky, but yeah, with this film project, we have regular Zoom catch-ups,
Hmm.
and it's so important. We just to make sure both people, well, I say both, the entire team is thinking about the same thing in the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So I know that there is a few opinions that you have about film and music. And one thing that you had mentioned to me before and in our chats and our emails is that you have a bit of an opinion about the use of melody in film scores. Would you care to elaborate on that for me?
Oh, Stephen, I've got loads of opinions.
Oh,
I can't help it.
well,
Well, I mean, you'll know this very well. In film, over the last decades, there's been a complete shift in style away. I mean, obviously, it goes in cycles. There was a
mhm,
shift in style away from melody before John Williams,
right,
as things moved and got a bit more electronic. So, what we now think of as a very old fashioned style, Mr. Williams, at
right,
the time, uh, was very exciting because it had not been heard for so long. And so
right,
we have sort of had boom and bust for that sort of orchestral writing that's very thematic. Very,
mhm,
with any of his sort of scores, they're often leitmotif led. So he'll assign snippets of melody
right,
to characters or to feeling, and that still very much happens. But these days, I think there's been a huge shift away from actually doing that specifically with melody. We get a lot
mm,
more of that now, maybe attaching an instrument to a character, or you know, um, a harmonic shift. Uh,
mhm,
in the Hans Zimmer Batman, that it's just two notes. That's
right,
how little his theme became, which I think is extraordinary
right,
because what he actually did with that was incredibly creative and evocative,
yeah,
and you do clock every time that it happens. But
right,
that's a world away from the flying theme in ET, for example. And
right,
it's not using melody as an expression. It's not using
mhm,
it as a way of eliciting an emotion in the same way that it
right,
used to. But the thing is, I really enjoy that. That's one of the things I love doing, and I'm quite aware that
mhm,
I swim against the tide on this.
yeah,
Um, but I'd like to think it's one of the things that sets me apart. That I call it old-fashioned, but I do always want to write a melody to
right,
to fit in, to help tell the
right,
story. But then
right, exactly,
once you have those hopefully incredibly memorable
mhm,
themes, what you then have is an instant connection to the listener, and then you can do
exactly,
stuff with that. And if it's not memorable, you don't get that free
yeah,
pass, you know.
exactly. For me, some of the most memorable films have the most memorable tunes.
And I think if
It
you ask any general film goer about film music, they'll always hum something, and it'll always be
right,
the they don't. No one hums a harmonic change, or
right,
it's not. It just doesn't, because it doesn't stay with you in the same way.
right.
And I don't know. I don't think this is about my ego, but it might be. But it's always nice, isn't it? It's always nice to make something that is remembered in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. Why do you think there is such a change in that? Why do you think we're like shifting away from melody in film?
I sus Well, it could be a couple of things. I think there's the element of fashion comes
Hmm.
into it. I mean, like I said, it's we go in cycles, as everything does. Even clothes
Hmm.
fashion. Everybody thinks their generation is the craziest, most creative one, and then they realize when they finally check it out that actually everyone was wearing that 30 years before as well.
Yeah.
Um, but it's John Williams is writing very distinctly in a style a generation or so before him.
Yeah.
And I think John Powell is doing exactly that again. His
Hmm.
his stuff, his fantasy works, things like How to Train Your Dragon, it's just an extension of that again with really bold themes. But he's sort of taken it. He worked with Hans Zimmer for a very long time
Hmm.
and sort of fused the John Williams melodic leitmotif ideas with Hans Zimmer enormous orchestra that sounds almost hyper real, and it's large, he makes it sound like that there's more musicians than you could ever fit into a room.
Mm-hmm.
And but yeah, I think it's gone in a cycle there. But it's interesting that John Powell is only doing those specific types of films like that.
Yeah.
But I think another thing is that the way scores are written now doesn't lend itself to that sort of writing.
Mm-hmm.
Firstly, those orchestral scores are incredibly expensive to do.
Yeah.
But when often music is written, using perhaps Logic,
Mm-hmm.
on a computer, and scored to that, and you're kind of locked in a tempo grid. This is one of my slight bugbears with how a lot of music is written at the moment. You can so hear that it's written to a metronome.
Right.
And I think one of the secret powers of older music, of classical music, of John Williams's music,
Mm-hmm.
of any of the music that was written before it was done on a computer, it's not bound by that. In those older composers would be writing, knowing vaguely when their music was going to be syncing with the picture, but the
Right.
music would sort of expand and breathe with the action on screen in a way
Right.
that it doesn't now. I don't think it's it's almost like overlaying a grid of crotchets, so quarter notes, I think
Mm-hmm.
you say, uh,
Yeah.
with a picture, and just going, right, well, that quarter note hits there, so I need a bar of 5/4 to make that work. Whereas actually, I
Mm-hmm.
think it's more about feeling something
Mm-hmm.
and making it land in the right place. So I try and write without that grid, which makes things so much more fiddly when it comes to bar numbering, measure numbering, lining things up. And especially when you get
Yeah.
an edit back and the film has changed length slightly and you need to
Mm-hmm.
remap your cues on, that becomes really tricky when you haven't recorded to a grid. But
Yeah.
I like that expression, and I think that it's a whole tool in the armory that is not being used by
Mm-hmm.
contemporary film music. This ability to shift in tempo during a film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like I was saying before, some of the most memorable movies that I've seen have some of the greatest tunes. And when you get like, because of those certain moments that you have where you get to the height of an emotion and all of a sudden this melody comes back, and it's that resurface of that emotion that you didn't realize that was coming before, um or to hammer in something that the filmmakers were wanting you to feel, uh and by not having that melody kind of takes away that minute of, or moment of emotion that you could that one could possibly feel. And then I would imagine at that point the filmmakers would have to make a different decision, or they would have to have the actors do more. But I don't know if you feel that there is a difference for melody, and primarily because of the movies that I think of with melody are more cartoons. Do you feel like um, melody is more important in an animated film as opposed to something that is more live action, or something along those lines?
That's a really interesting point. I don't think it's more important. I just think
Mm-hmm.
that currently it's one of the few genres that still allows it, where it's still
Yeah.
fashionable. And I don't think the music to animated films and sort of fantasy adventure films, I don't think those have really changed very much.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas other genres have, completely embraced different styles.
Right.
I think you could use a lot of recent film music for animated features. You could use that in something years ago and it would fit, and vice versa. I don't mean literally, but they're all related. They all sound quite similar. I love that. Honestly, it would be a dream to do that kind of thing. It's one of the few places where you can really do that crazy full orchestral palette. It feels right.
Yeah.
I think, something like, I mentioned it before, How to Train Your Dragon, that would sound really empty with an electronic score. It just doesn't match what you're seeing, does it? If you're seeing Technicolor, you want to hear it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you feel like there is a genre of film that melody would not necessarily fit well when writing a score?
I don't know if I can pinpoint a genre specifically, because there are always films in that genre that do actually do that. I mean, if you take, for instance, an action film, modern action films like something like The Bourne Identity, any of those kinds of things, they don't really have strong themes. They're just even though The Bourne Identity is incredibly similar to a James Bond film or something like that, James Bond is all about here are your melodic ideas. I mean, they're still using the ones from 30 years ago, interlaced with new ones as well, which is this is a whole other thing as well. I think it's really, I find modern Bonds are sort of moving away from that melodic style as well. But that's my point, is that that is that kind of film, and you can do it with or without that style. But I think it makes a lot of films sound quite samey. Those Bourne films, I do feel like action cues in that. You could pretty much move to a dozen, hundreds of other films, and it wouldn't you wouldn't really notice at all. Obviously, they're very meticulously matched to the picture, but there's nothing about them that you remember in the same way. Whereas if you take something like Indiana Jones, another action film where it's completely, chop it in half and it bleeds melody everywhere. And yet still manages to achieve those incredible action sequences. So I don't know. I don't think it's a genre thing. I just think it's about. I just think it's a fashion thing more recently.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not particularly keen on the idea of writing an action film. But I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, who knows? In your own work, because there's obviously moments of scoring where melody is not really needed at that point. Just kind of background music setting the mood. Obviously, you've very much been an advocate for melody, but in those kinds of moments where you're scoring those moments where there's not really a melody needed, what goes through your mind as a composer to make sure that it still fits within the film, still fits within any kind of melodic material that's already been built around it?
Well, that's interesting, because one of the problems you have if you're writing with melody is that it's very attention-seeking, which I think is probably why it works so well in things like fantasy and animated film. But there are moments in a film where you don't want the music to be taking any attention at all. The music, you always have to remember, in film music, it's supposed to be in the background, helping tell the story, but it's not a concert.
Exactly.
And so there are always moments when it can come to the fore. But you have to remember that there are these times when you have to step back and let the dialogue do the work, or the actors' faces, or the tiniest little things. Film can, the camera gets so close in. The most incredible things can be said by the movement of an eyebrow or a glance between, and all you need to do is support that. But what I try and do, you can do all sorts of things, like use the chords, use the harmony that you've used under a melody earlier. Or you could do the melody incredibly slowly so that it's not even noticed as a line. You know, one of the things I love doing once you've established these themes is using them to create other music, whether that becomes hidden in an accompaniment motif of some sort, or, like I said, the outline of some harmony. So that, for me, it's quite a nice way to make sure the entire piece is built of the same components and that it feels like a whole. At any point in the film, there is something that's connected to the themes you've created in some way. I don't want it to be noticeable, but what I want to know is that everything I've constructed for this film is there for a reason and is related to each other and couldn't have been in any other way.
Yeah. Thank you for dropping by to watch this video. If you want to continue this episode, head over to your favorite podcast platform now and subscribe to the show. You can also finish watching this episode with 20 extra minutes of deleted content right on the Composer Chronicles' Patreon page when you sign up at the $5 Revelian tier or the $10 Wagnerian tier. All Patreon members also get early access to ad-free versions of the podcast. So head on over there for some great bonus content while you're supporting the Composer Chronicles. You can find the links to the podcast and the Patreon in the description below. This episode of the Composer Chronicles was edited for video by Matthew Trigar, with theme music written by Daryl Banner. In the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a little icon pop up for you to go to listen to more of Ben's incredible music. So once this video is over, go head on over to Ben's YouTube channel and check out all of his amazing projects. Be sure to subscribe to the Alexandrian Media YouTube channel for more videos like this one, and hit that notification bell so you'll never miss an episode. You can find all information about this episode below in the description, and give this video a thumbs up if you've enjoyed watching. I look forward to seeing you over on the podcast or on the Patreon to finish up this episode. See you there.